Hey there everyone, welcome to Tales in Text and welcome to my reading wrap up for the months of July and August. So in the past couple of months I have been giving you a reading wrap up every 2 months, and the months of July and August have been pretty good for me in terms of my reading. Before I head into the books that I actually completed, I do want to give sort of update for those of you who are following my Mahabharata readathon. I am progressing quite well in the volume 7. I have less than 200 pages. I believe I have around 180 pages or something to complete volume 7. I am hoping that in the next week I can complete volume 7, and by next weekend I can come up with a review for the volume 7 of the Bori critical edition of the Mahabharata. So cheer me on because we've almost come to the end of the war. In fact, I'm already on day 18, so the war is about to come to an end, and yeah, hopefully by next weekend I will have that video review ready for you. All right, now that we've got this out of the way, let me now talk to you about the books that I did complete reading in the months of July and August. Now, I want to talk about the only audiobook that I completed first before I touch the physical books that you see behind me there. The first book that I finished, which was an audiobook, was Eliza Clarke's Boy Parts. Now, this is a book that has been trending quite a lot on Instagram, and it's been trending even on BookTube and on BookTok and on various platforms, and that's because this book is something very edgy, very contemporary. It deals with the current digital age, and in fact it deals with a topic that is fascinating and taboo at the same time, which is fetish photography. Now, for those of you who are not sure what fetish photography is, so fetish photography basically takes these really taboo subjects. Typically they can be about sexuality or about those spaces of life that are not exactly mainstream, that people avert their eyes from usually. They're, again, like I said, it's really edgy and it's really out there, and these could also include things like kink, for example. So fetish art in itself can extend to a lot of things, but they're essentially non-mainstream, and they're those parts of our life that typically people tend to gloss over or turn away from because it's not considered appropriate for the mainstream audiences to consume. Now, Boy Parts by Eliza Clarke is a book that follows the story of Irina, a fetish photographer living in the UK. The book is essentially a commentary on the British youth, and specifically is a commentary on, again, this is something that I picked up on. The themes that I believe exist in the book are all about the digital era and the impact of social media and real versus real life, about growing up as especially as a white British person in today's age, and dealing with things like token wokeism or the ingrained racism that is there in many British families, white British families, because of a lot of the colonial baggage that comes from the past. The book also deals with things like queer baiting, because when you look at social media today, there's a lot of queer baiting for the token representation. That you see a lot of celebrities doing it, but also a lot of people also fall into that pitfall or into that trap, you could say. The book was also about drug usage, alcohol consumption, and just the excess and indulgence of the youth, specifically of Gen Z and younger generations. All of the characters in this book, including Irina, the protagonist, is they're all in their early to late 20s, that kind of the 20s age range. So they're all pretty young. They all have unconventional jobs, and I'm not just talking about fetish photography. I'm talking about things like being a bartender or being a model. And so the careers which are conventionally not considered traditional careers, stable careers which are basically more about celebrating your creativity and your agency. So the book starts off looking at Irina and her life as a fetish artist, and slowly sort of veers into the sort of true crime thriller kind of a neighborhood, I would say. The book by itself sounds really interesting because, without giving too many spoilers, it's about the kind of world Irina really inhabits, as opposed to what she is, the facade that she's showing the world, and how her photography acts like a mirror to the reality of her life. And how these clues are sort of embedded in the kind of photos that she takes, and it's just that people don't realize the true extent of who or what Irina is and what she's capable of, right? So the book by itself, the premise is really nice, but I just felt like the book was very, very confused in its actual execution. I did not feel like Eliza Clarke was able to really capture all of these diverse themes that she really wanted to put forth. It seemed very sloppy in its execution. While the first part of it did keep me engaged, I wouldn't say I was hooked. I was engaged, certainly. As I crossed the half mark of the novel, I just felt like, okay, this story could have been shorter. One of the reasons I perhaps might have not liked it is because of the narration too on Audible. Eliza Clarke herself has narrated this book, and I don't know if it's her original accent or it's an adopted accent she's taken on to fulfill the character requirements for Irina. But I really could not actually understand or comprehend the accent quite well, and there were a lot of times when I had to keep rewinding because British accent comes again like American accents is varied, and while some British accents are easy to understand, there are others that are really, really heavy, and it's really difficult for non-British speakers to understand British accents. Just like I'm sure non-Indian speakers would also find my accent difficult to understand. So I found the accent to be a huge problem for me when I was listening to the book, and I think that could also have contributed to why I did not feel as engaged to it, as connected to it. But overall, I felt like the book just sort of tried to take on more than was necessary and more than was capable of taking on. So at the end, it just kind of became like a sloppy mess. And the finale of the book, the ending of the book, which was supposed to be this like, oh my god moment, it sort of fell flat for me. Perhaps that could also have been because I do consume true crime content a lot, whether it's on OTT or in books or in podcasts. I do consume the true crime content quite a bit, so I may have not responded to it as well because it's something that I kind of expected as I was nearing the end of the book. So overall, I would sort of give this book maybe a 2.75 out of 5 as a rating. It's not bad. You can pick it up and you can read it, but again, I would temper my expectations, and I wouldn't really get swayed by the entire Bookstagram, Booktube and Booktop hype about Boy Parts by Eliza Clarke. The next book that I want to talk about is the book, again, I'm starting with all of my physical books right now, and this is the book that I least liked in this entire months of July and August, and that is Ahalya by Koral Dasgupta. Now, I don't know if you can see this image of the cover in clarity over here on your screen because of the lighting from the back, but I think the cover of this book, the cover design, is possibly the only thing that is really good about this book. I absolutely detested this novel, and it was just such a shame because I was really, really eagerly looking forward to reading this book. Ahalya's story is something that those of you who follow the Ramayana or who know the Ramayana will be familiar with, but I am just going to provide you some context for those of you who are not familiar with who Ahalya is. So Ahalya is Sage Gautama's wife. In the Ramayana, or as I would say, this story actually predates the Ramayana by quite a bit, and essentially Ahalya is this really beautiful woman. She is married to Sage Gautama, and Indra falls in love with Ahalya, and he wants to claim her. He wants to basically have sex with her. Indra is a lot like Zeus. They're both horny gods, and they don't really care how many people they violate, how many women they violate, how many families they destroy, as long as their needs are taken care of. So Indra he wants Ahalya by hook or by crook, and so when Gautama would have gone to take a bath early in the morning, Indra assumes the physical form of Gautama and takes Ahalya to bed. When Gautama returns, he finds out that Ahalya has slept with Indra, and instead of forgiving her for being a victim of Indra's duplicitousness, Gautama curses Ahalya that because she has been an unfaithful wife and an impure woman, she will turn into stone, and she will continue to be a stone statue unable to move, unable to do anything, but still seeing and sensing and feeling everything in the world, until Sri Rama comes and frees her with his touch. And of course, Gautama also curses Indra. Some stories say he curses him to sprout 1,000 eyes on his body. Some stories say that he curses Indra to sprout 1,000 vaginas on his body, as an open, sort of humiliating reminder to everyone that this curse is due to Indra's insatiable lust. So the story of Ahalya by Koral Dasgupta actually comes within the series that she calls the Sati series. So these are the Satis according to Koral Dasgupta. She is sort of conflating the Satis with the Panchakanyas, which are basically two separate categories of women who are important women according to Hindu mythology and Hindu legends. In the Sati series, Koral Dasgupta talks of Ahalya, Mandodari, Tara, Draupadi and Kunti as being women who are made of nerves of steel, who undergo so much trials and tribulations and are at the mercy of the patriarchal world, but they overcome these challenges in their own unique ways. And Ahalya's story was something that I was so interested in reading, because I've not had a chance to read a story or a narrative from the perspective of someone like Ahalya, because usually you see a lot of the male dominated or male perspective representations or reinterpretations of the epics, or you have popular renditions of people like Draupadi and Kunti once again. But Ahalya, Mandodari and Tara, for example, are not very often heard from or even represented in reinterpretations or even within the original epics themselves. So I was very excited to read this book, and in fact I ended up going and buying this and Tara and Mandodari's book as well. And then I sat and read this, and I finished this in 2 days, and I absolutely hated it. Koral Dasgupta writes like a juvenile writer who's, as if this is the first time that they are writing, and this is something they're sort of trying to impress the reader with their vocabulary, because they sort of have a sense of the superiority complex that their language seems to be better than everybody else's in the world, to the point that if you are actually someone who has a good grasp of the English language, you will see so many errors in this. Some sentences don't even make sense. It's like what she's trying to convey, that doesn't come across well, because either she's used the wrong word for something, or she's used the wrong grammar, so it changes the meaning completely to the opposite. Overall, the reading of this book was just really like black. Ugh. Right, so I mean, boring, contrived, full of grammatical errors, and the worst part is she sort of makes Ahalya into this, okay, look, see, I want to preface this by saying that I am all for female leads who embrace their sexuality and who want to claim their sexuality as their own and say that, what, I'm going to give in, I'm going to experience everything, I'm going to experience the world on my terms. I am all for it, because I am all for female agency. And I am all for Ahalya also saying that I want to have sensual experiences, because I've been given this body, I've been given these senses, and I want to experience life for all that it has to offer. I am all for that. But when an entire book is all about how Ahalya only wants sexual gratification, to the cost of sort of diminishing her other traits, I think you do such a great disservice to the character when you write a character that way. And this book sort of makes Ahalya seem like a nymphomaniac. I'm sorry. I mean, and the funny thing is, she doesn't have sex with anyone apart from Gautama, and she does masturbate, that's it. But she's always thinking about physical gratification, which is something I feel like, I'm sure Koral Dasgupta could have written this book in a way where she could have balanced the need for sexual fulfillment while also sort of taking up those other traits and positives of Ahalya, which did not happen. So I ended up really disliking this, and I gave it a 1-star review. It's a 1-star for me. The only reason this book also has a 1-star is because of the cover. The cover is just gorgeous, and also if I'm just talking about the book size, this is so ergonomic. You can put it in your handbag, you can put it in your backpack, and you can just walk around. You can even hold it in your hand if you're traveling by the metro or by the bus or whichever public transport. So I found this very convenient to hold, and the cover to be very beautifully designed. I think that's the only reason that this book has even got a 1 star. I think otherwise I would have given it a 0 star. Overall, I did not like this book. I did not enjoy this book. So I think I might be in the minority here, because wherever I've seen online, the reviews for this book have been pretty good. So let me know if you've read this. What do you think about it? Rebellious, Cobbler by Dwarka Bharati is a book that I have actually reviewed in full. It's part of my anti-caste and Dalit literature. I will link down the full video in the description box or in the end cards. So do go check it out if you're interested in anti-caste literature. So Dwarka Bharati ji is actually one of the foremost Dalit writers and Dalit literary figures in India. He is a celebrated Punjabi and Hindi writer as well, and he identifies himself not with these monikers of being a writer, a literati, an intellectual. Rather, he identifies himself as a cobbler, as the profession that put food on his plate, as the profession that put a roof over his head, and as the profession that educated his children, and as a profession that is paying for his health care, and just which built his life. This book was really beautifully, I would say it's very, very beautifully captured, in the sense that it's an autobiography by Dwarka Bharati ji, and it is very beautifully, it's a nuanced narrative of a person's life, which not only shows us the horrors that caste society inflicts upon people, but which also shows us the triumphs of people who are, who take matters into their own hands, and who say, you know what, I can't change the world without first working on my own circumstances. I know nobody else is going to help me, so I have to rely on myself. So I will rely on myself. I'll rely on my community who wants to support me and who I want to support as well. And we're going to get out of get out of the trenches, I would say, together. So this book was really interesting. I'm not going to spend too much time describing this book, because I have a long video describing this book, so you can take a look at that. I'm normally someone who doesn't really buy autobiographies, especially people I have never heard about, and this was someone I had never heard about. But I've begun reading a lot of caste or rather I would say anti-caste and Dalit literature recently, and a lot of the books that I have been reading are more of the academic type, and I really wanted a book that kind of encapsulated, or that took from the real lives of people, because academic books can only take you so far. If we have to truly empathize with someone, and if we truly want to make a difference, we need to understand the lived experiences of people, and I think books like Rebellious, Cobbler help us there. So I picked this up from Panthers publication. It's a book, or it's a publisher you may have heard of, even in my the Outside the Fold review, which is a set of essays on untouchables and untouchability by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. I will link that down below in the description box as well. So do go check that book out, as well, because that book is really, really fabulous. So very small book. Once again, I finished reading this in about a week. This book, surprisingly, you know what? It tells us of so many writers from across India, who are both Dalit writers and non-Dalit writers, who have transformed the Indian literary landscape and who have transformed literary education in India. That is, they are people whose works have been adopted by universities like IGNOU, for example, that is the Indira Gandhi National Open University, which is one of the most popular open universities in India. So these really prestigious universities have taken some of these writers' creations, their writings, and have included them in their literary studies, in their Dalit studies material, in their literary studies materials, in their language studies materials, and these are authors and these are writers who it's very unlikely that we would have heard of them. I in fact have never heard of them until this day. So I think this book is it's a really good introduction into the literary landscape and the evolution of literary landscape and the contribution of Dalit writers in the evolution of the literary landscape in India. So definitely check this out. The next book in my list is my most favorite book for the months of July and August, and that is Fate's Game and Other Stories by Kodagina Gouramma. Isn't this cover gorgeous? It's beautiful, right? This is the author's picture, in fact. Okay, so Fate's Game and Other Stories is a really interesting book because the author Kodagina Gouramma, Kodagu is the local name for the city of or the district of Coorg in Karnataka. It's a it's a co it's a sort of a hill station. I would say that's the easiest way to describe it. Coorg is a beautiful district, replete with forests and just like it just feels like a paradise if you visit it. Kodagina Gouramma is considered one of the earliest feminist writers from Karnataka and from South India. She was born in 1912 in Coorg, and or Kodagu as it was called. And she was, I'm going to read the back up here because I don't want to get anything wrong. Okay, she's one of the three major feminist writers in Kannada from the early 20th century, whose career was only about 8 years long and 21 short stories long. Born in Kodagu in 1912, she was influenced by Gandhi after his visit to the district, and she became a khadi-wearing nationalist and budding politician. Gouramma was an ace swimmer and a tennis player, pursuits not common in the upper caste conservative community she was born into. Her stories were all published posthumously after her untimely death in a swimming accident at the age of 28 in 1930. Caught in a web of family tradition and duty, the women at the center of Gouramma's stories grapple with the demands of love, betrayal, and sacrifice. Several of them focus on the plight of the emancipation of widows of all ages. So, this book, I really enjoyed this book. In fact, I enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I did, or I thought I would before I started reading this book. I purchased this book because this author is virtually unknown. Very few people know about this author. Very few people have had the privilege of reading this author, which is very sad. And as I started reading this book has 21 stories. These are the only stories Gouramma has ever written. This is her picture, like I said. Her grandson sourced it for this book. This is the only known picture available of Gouramma. Every story in A Fate's Game centers a woman protagonist or a girl protagonist, and each of these women or girls, they are grappling with challenges that were inherent to early 20th century, that is the 1900s Karnataka. Patriarchal issues, lots of these women were caught in the web, sort of spun by the men in their lives or by lawmakers. The issues that these women faced range from something as big as nationalistic issues to something which is considered small but which is something really important to things like agency to decide what to wear or what to eat, what to cook. This first few stories, you can see the evolution of the author. These 21 stories were written in a very short time. The overall the stories were, the author's literary journey was around 8 years long, but I believe these stories were all written within 1 or 2 years. That's it. You can see in the first few stories how the emotional depth is missing, but the ideas are there. You can see a writer who's evolving, who has these big ideas, and as a woman writer living in the 1920s, in the 1910s and 1920s sort of era, she is questioning these patriarchal practices that have oppressed women for so many centuries. She's brave enough to question them. She's brave enough to propose alternative solutions. She's brave enough to challenge the men in her stories as to why they behave the way that they do and why women are made to suffer the way they are. As you read all of the stories, and I would recommend, if you're buying this book, I would recommend you read this in one shot. That is, read all the stories one after the other. You will see her evolution as a writer. By the time I read the 21st story, I was in tears. Her stories had developed this beautiful nuance and this beautiful emotional depth that is something that is just stunning. And as I read these stories, and the very first story, last story in fact, is actually an incomplete story, because she wrote the first half of that story the night before she would inevitably pass away. Because the very next day she would go on that swimming go to swim in the village pond, and that's where she would drown. And you feel heartbroken because her talent is so visible. She has matured so much as a writer that you feel like, as a reader, you feel the loss of a writer who could have transformed the literary landscape tremendously. I think Gouramma's loss was a tremendous loss for Kannada literature. Uh, I think it's a shame, it's a tragedy. But I think everyone needs to read this book to celebrate the budding talent and celebrate the brilliant talent that she would have one day become if she had survived. There are a couple of stories where we confront when young girls as young as 13, 14, 15, who turn around and again, look, these are times, the 1920s, that 19 early 1900 era is a time when it was okay, or it was considered okay, for an older man, that is a man in his 30s or 40s, to marry a girl who was just between 10 and 15 years old, and that was accepted, right? But we see young girls who are as young as 13, 14, 15 questioning these older men who are nearing their 40s, as to why they want to take away the childhood and the innocence that these young girls deserve to have just to fulfill their lust. Because these are men who were married before, they've lost their wives, or for whatever reason, and you see these young girls questioning that, and it's such a bold moment. Can you imagine someone in the 1920s reading this and thinking, and then seeing this woman question a practice that so many others have never questioned before? I think that takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of courage to do that. Lots of stories also talk about things like chosen love, like where women they exert their agency and they decide to live life on their terms. Many stories also talk about denying certain feelings, denying love for oneself, denying certain freedoms, so as to maintain those familial relationships, those familial bonds, the fabric of society, so that others do not suffer. It's like basically sacrificing yourself at the altar of society so others do not suffer. So the women in Gouramma's stories are portrayed in all the myriad facets of womanhood. Feminism is portrayed in multiple perspectives. There is no one single definition of feminism. While for some, feminism is about defying patriarchal traditions, for others it's about making required compromises so that for the greater good of other family members or friends. Women's strength is showcased in such beautiful, tender ways. This book really stayed with me for a very long time after I read this. And I think this is a book that I will definitely revisit some other day. I would actually sit up at night after dinner just before I go to bed to read a story a day. So I took my time with this, 21 stories, 21 days. And it felt so nice to just in those late hours of the night to just sit and read this book and just think about the plight of these women, because these were all inspired by women. These stories were inspired by real women in and around her life. So to think that there were women with all these problems, to know and acknowledge that there are women who still face the problems that the women in this book faced, and to know that it is these challenges that connect us as women, and that unfortunately, despite it being 2024 now, a lot of these challenges still don't have an answer. They still don't have a solution. And we wonder if our daughters will also continue to face these problems. So I think everyone should read this book. This is from Yoda Press. Yoda Press is once again a small publication who champion marginalized writers. I really think you should pick up this book, Fate's Game and Other Stories. Really interesting, very easy to read. Translation is done very well. I really enjoyed this book. This was a really good book. I've also I never annotate like these kind of stories, but I've actually sat and I've written a couple of notes in this book as well. So yeah, this was my reading list for the months of July and August. 4 books that I completed. The Mahabharata, like I said, I made a huge dent in that. Hopefully, again, like I said, next week I should have the review for you. Yeah, I have already started a couple of really interesting books for I mean, right now what I'm currently reading, and I think when you see my September and October reading review wrap up, you will get some really good picks as well. All right, so if you watched this video so far, thank you so much for watching, and do let me know in the comments what you read for the months of July and August, and what you've been reading so far for the entire year, and what are your reading goals and plans as we head to the final 4 months of this year. All right, thank you for watching and have a wonderful day. Bye bye.